In the heart of the ancient kingdom of Erewada, surrounded by rolling hills and thick forests laced with rivers of silver, a royal trumpet echoed across the land. The palace of King Odidika and Queen Mma buzzed with excitement. After years of waiting and prayers, a child had finally been born to the royal family. She came into the world on a harmattan morning, with the wind whispering blessings into her ears and the morning sun wrapping her small frame in golden light. The child was named Zimora. She was beautiful, more beautiful than the priest had seen in generations. Her eyes held the clarity of the morning sky. Her skin shimmered like bronze polished by angels. But she was small, unusually small. As she grew, the palace maids whispered in corners, and the royal doctors exchanged worried glances. Zimora, despite her growing mind and blooming beauty, never grew tall. By the time she turned 10, it was clear she would remain a dwarf for life. Her parents shielded her fiercely, but Zimora refused to live in shadows. She walked with grace and dignity, never allowing her height to define her presence. She was intelligent, gentle, and incredibly wise for her age. While other children played with beads and dolls, Zimora sat with elders and listened to tales of the ancestors. She learned the art of negotiation from her father and the strength of compassion from her mother. She wrote poetry, played the flute, and spent many hours tending to sick animals and comforting crying children in the marketplace. The people of Erewada called her Zimora the Gentle. But love, that strange and fickle visitor, seemed to avoid her like a curse. When she reached marriageable age, suitors came from far and wide, princes with white horses, noblemen with gold-studded cloaks, and chiefs with long lineages. Yet, one after the other, they looked at her, smiled awkwardly, and left with empty promises. Some were polite, others cruel. One laughed in her face, saying he couldn't marry someone he could carry under his arm. Another whispered to his guards that she looked like a child pretending to be queen. The palace tried to hide the rejections. Queen Mma often cried at night, and King Odidika grew silent with worry. But Zimora bore it all with quiet grace. She retreated often to the royal garden beneath the ancient baobab tree, where she would sit for hours speaking to the wind and listening to the birds. Her only comfort came from Neka, her elderly nursemaid, who had been by her side since birth. "You are not too small," Neka would always say. "The Creator doesn't make mistakes. The world is just too blind to see treasures in strange packages." Though her heart ached in silence, Zimora never allowed bitterness to take root. She continued to serve her people, to smile when it hurt, to love even when she was unloved. Then came the season of harvest, the time when the land was ripe and the air smelled of roasted yam and fresh palm wine. The celebration was interrupted by thunderous drums that signaled danger. Messengers from the northern province arrived breathless and bloody. The shadow beast of the Boko Mountains had returned. The shadow beasts, mythical creatures of ancient curses, were said to have eyes like fire and claws that tore through stone. They hadn't been seen in 100 years, and the last time they came, entire villages vanished without a trace. Panic swept through Erewada like a storm. King Odidika called an emergency council. Warriors from all across the kingdom were summoned, and among them was a man whose name trembled through every heart. User. He was a warrior from the highlands, raised among wolves and war. They said he once fought 3 lions with his bare hands and came out with only a scratch. He was tall, taller than any man Zimora had ever seen, his muscles chiseled, his presence powerful, and his voice deep enough to silence a room. When User entered the palace for the first time, the very walls seemed to lean in curiosity. Zimora was in the royal hall that day, seated quietly beside her mother. She had heard of User, of course. Everyone had. But she never expected their eyes to meet the way they did. He did not flinch. He did not blink in surprise or glance at her with awkward curiosity. Instead, he bowed his head gently and said, "My princess." The simple respect in his tone sent a warmth through her veins. She watched him as he knelt before the king, offering his service to defend the land. There was no arrogance in his voice, no boastful flair, just quiet strength. That evening, as she walked past the warriors' quarters to deliver herbs to the injured, she saw him again. He was sharpening his sword under the moonlight. "You walk silently, princess," he said without turning. "And you hear everything," she replied. He turned and smiled. It was not a wide, charming smile like the princess who had come before. It was real. Days later, Uzzah led a battalion into the north, and Zimora followed with the healing caravan. While others saw war as a matter for men, Zimora saw the aftermath, the wounded, the weeping, the displaced. She moved from tent to tent, placing cold cloths on fevered heads, feeding the hungry, singing songs to children who had lost their parents. Uzzah watched her from a distance, astonished. One night, he approached her as she sat alone under a torchlit tree. "You tend to pain like it is a flower," he said. "And you face death like it is your brother," she replied. They both laughed, the kind of laughter that cuts through fear. From that night, they began to talk. Uzzah would tell her of his childhood, how he lost his parents to a raid and was raised by forest dwellers who taught him how to survive, how to fight, and how to never bow to fear. She told him of life in the palace, of the silence behind gold doors, of the loneliness that echoed through jeweled halls. "I used to think my height was a curse," she whispered one night. "A punishment for something I do not remember doing." Uzzah looked at her with his dark, calm eyes. "And I used to think I was made for nothing but war." He reached out and gently took her hand. "Maybe we were both wrong. Their love did not come like thunder. It came like the rising sun, soft, slow, and impossible to ignore." When the battle against the shadow beast was finally won, and Uzzah returned a hero, the people celebrated him with drums and dance. But it was Zimora's face he sought in the crowd. She stood in the background, her golden robe shimmering, her small figure lost among giants. But when he approached her, the world seemed to pause. "I do not care how tall the world is," he said. "I only care that you see me the way I see you." When he went to the king days later and asked for Zimora's hand in marriage, the royal council erupted. "He is a warrior," one elder said. "She is of royal blood. He is tall like a palm tree, she is shorter than a child." Imagine the sight of them walking together, it will invite mockery. Zimora stood silently for a while, letting them speak. Then she walked forward. "I have listened to your voices for many years," she said softly, "and I have obeyed out of respect. But today, I will listen to my heart." The council grew silent. "You speak of images and traditions. I speak of love and honor." Uzzah did not laugh at my height. He did not hide behind courtly politeness or ride away like others. He stayed. He fought for this kingdom. He fought beside me. And he saw me, not my body, but my spirit. Even Queen MMA, who had once feared her daughter would die alone, could not hold back her tears. King Odidika stood slowly, looked at Uzzah, then at his daughter. "Let it be so," he said. "May this marriage be the first of its kind, but not the last." The wedding of Zimora and Uzzah shook the land. People from distant villages came to witness it. The altar was built beneath the great baobab tree where Zimora had once wept alone. Now she stood radiant in royal crimson, her crown glinting in the sunlight, her smile brighter than the dawn. Uzzah wore a white warrior's cloak, his eyes never leaving hers. When they stood together, their difference in height was stark. But no one laughed. No one mocked. For in their eyes burned a love that dwarfed every custom, every prejudice, every whisper of doubt. From that day forward, they ruled not with iron, but with wisdom. They built schools and homes, abolished cruel traditions, and welcomed every kind of love into their kingdom. People began to tell their children bedtime stories not of golden dragons or hidden treasures, but of the dwarf princess and the mighty warrior who taught the world that true greatness has nothing to do with size. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the wind sang through the trees, Zimora would still visit the baobab tree, not to cry, but to dance. For she had found her place, her love, her peace. And she had risen, not in height, but in heart, above them all.